First, we'll be monitoring what's going on in Chad regarding the presidential election. We'll give you a rundown of some of our talking points. We'll look at the conduct of polls amidst political tensions, and then focus our attention on the question, can Chad break the Derby family hold on power? And major concerns for voters, importantly, in Chad. And joining us is Joseph Umaro Philip, who is an election observer. He's the governance program coordinator at the Goodluck Jonathan Foundation, a democratic governance expert, peace building and data expert, and the alumni of the African Civic Engagement Academy, and a member of the University of Abuja Leadership Center. Well, our second topic will focus on the U.S. front's bid to move military base to Nigeria. Why U.S. French troops were asked to leave Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Chad. We will try to get answers to that question with our second guest. Well, and we'll also look at concerns over U.S. French government's interest to host military bases in Nigeria, and the pros and cons of U.S. Front's defense agreements with West African nations. And our guest, Dr. Stephen Okwori, who is a security expert, will also be joining us to have the conversation. He's a security, safety, and crime management consultant, a member of the American Society for Industrial Security, international and the local chapter in Abuja. He's also a certified gold member of the International Security Association of Switzerland and the World Bodyguard Association, WBA. We'll be right back. Stay with us. All right, let's break down the updates. First, we've got graphics about the elections in Chad. You should know that Chad holds elections on the national level for a head of state, the president, and the legislature. The president is elected for a 5-year term by the people, and Chad is a one-party dominant state with the Patriotic Salvation Movement in power. And Human Rights Watch has criticized the election process in the country, arguing that they have problems such as electoral fraud, multiple voting, underage voting, and low voter turnout. Let's give you a history of elections so far in Chad. Recall that former President Idris Deby seized power in 1990 through a rebellion. In May 2001, Deby won the presidential election in the first round with 63% of the vote. The 2011 election was boycotted by the major opposition parties, leading to Deby's victory. Now, Deby was elected for his 5th term in 2016. In 2004, recall that presidential term limits was abolished. And in 2021, elections were postponed due to COVID-19. And on the 20th of April, 2021, after Idris Deby was killed, his son Mahamat Deby became president. So let's take a look at the major candidates in this election. First is General Mahamat Idris Deby. He's the transitional president who came to power under the ruling Patriotic Salvation Movement Party, MPS, and he will run under the United Chad Coalition, which consists of several other pro-government parties. Interesting. And secondly, Success Masara, who is one of the major candidates, of course, is Deby's appointed prime minister and a Harvard and Oxford educated economist. Masra was the strongest opposition figure until his appointment in January 2024, campaigning under the Transformers Party, and he was a member of the vocal opposition coalition Wakit Tama, which had started to protest the long rule of the older Deby in 2021. The next presidential candidate is Albert Pahimi Padak, a 2-time former prime minister and 1-time presidential candidate under the older Deby. Albert will run under the semi-opposition RNDT Laraville Party or the National Rally of Chadian Democrats, which aligned with older Deby's political party at the time. He came second in the last presidential elections in April 2021. Now, our Chadians began voting for president on Monday in an election ostensibly aimed at ending military rule. The elections are part of a transition back to democracy from rule by Chad's military government, which is one of several currently in power in West and Central Africa. General Mahamat Idris Deby, the head of the Chadian junta, voted at a polling unit station in Jamina. The presidential election marks the end of a 3-year rule with an unprecedented match between Deby and his prime minister's success, Massara, the former opponent of his regime. And Chad's presidential candidate, the prime minister's success, Massara, has also casted his own vote in an election that is purportedly aimed at ending military rule, but of course dismissed by opponents of the junta leader, Mahamat Idris Deby, as a fix following violent repression. Well, after casting his ballot, Massara called on Chadians to vote en masse in the election. Well, there have been 8 coups so far in the region since 2020, sparking concerns of a democratic backslide. It is the first time in Chad's history that a president and a prime minister will face each other in a presidential poll. And Deby initially promised an 18-month transition to elections after he seized power back in 2021 when his long-ruling father was killed in clashes with rebels. But his government later adopted resolutions that postponed elections until 2024 and allowed him to run for president, which has triggered protests that were violently quelled by security forces. Well, of course, with us on set to talk about this is our guest, Joseph Amaro Philip, who is an election observer. So good to have you once again on set with me. Thank you so much for your time. Okay, we've heard, all that we need to hear from the opener that I just did. You have Massara and Deby together in this presidential election. Does that make any sense to you?
I think the beauty of it is even the first things first, being that they are finally having elections.
After how many years? Over 30 years.
Yeah. And it's also something positive to take because you have the Sahelian states being under military regime. So finally, we have some sort of a concrete efforts towards transition to democratic rule. It is not as it should have been, but then we need to celebrate the small wins, and the elections today presents that. But for me, however, it's key also that we look at the major issues building to the elections. And first of all, like you pointed out, you have a president and his prime minister contesting or being the major candidates. But we know also before now there were a list of 10 candidates that were released by the Constitutional Court as those approved to be on the ballot. Now, how inclusive, how free, how just and fair?
When you look at the reason that the electoral body in the country gave, they said others were disqualified due to irregularities. I mean, how does that make sense?
Well, irregularities, I wish...
Given the fact that those candidates were some of the outspoken ones.
Because that is where I'm leading to. And when you... Irregularities is not enough. We need to have that process, or that openness, right? For instance, it's unfortunate that even trying to research more about the elections, the information is more of a bits and pieces. There is nothing wholesome. That again speaks, but that is something for another day. But beyond that is when you talk about irregularities. Just February, or will I say in March, we had the Senegalese election, and you have, yes, the current Prime Minister, Sanko, being disqualified due to irregularities. We also have other formidable candidates that were also disqualified due to irregularities. And then funny enough, the current president was among those, would I say at a point, approved to vote. But then if you follow that trajectory, you could see that the grand scheme then was to disqualify the major opponents and then allow the seemingly weak candidates to contest, right? And then fast track now to Chad, you can see that the strongest of the opposition or the strongest candidates outside that of the current interim president happens to be the immediate
Prime Minister.
Prime Minister, and
who was formerly an opposition. So what deal did they make to get him on board?
What deal did they make? And then apart from the fact that what deal did they make is also the fact that are they just playing to the gallery, or are they really? Because what happens if peradventure Masra wins? But though there is that opinion out there that it's almost impossible for that to happen. But then I think come 21st of subsequently, if there will be a second round, come maybe, I think is it 25th or so, we'll get to know. But fundamentally for me is the process. Like it's very important. Yes, we have candidates in the ballot, but how did they get to the ballot? These are some of the issues we need to interrogate. I know that there is some semblance of excitement in Chad that elections is happening, which is beautiful in its own way. But beyond this is also the fact that we need to start insisting that election is not an event, it's a process. You know how it is when you say it should not just be fair, it should be seen and perceived to be fair. It's very important because these elections we're talking about are the endorsement of the legitimacy. And then let's even revert back and backtrack a bit and ask ourselves, even if we look at it among the military juntas in the Sahel, to a large extent, Dabi is the least popular. So one can say this is an attempt to legitimize or to gain that popularity. So, but then the question would now be, if today we are having these elections, how sure are we that we won't have another coup? Because it's unfortunate that we know when we look at...
So is this more of securing the democratic process, which they have been hoping for, given the fact that his dad was formerly, a military ruler, and then he took over from his dad? So do you see a purity of thought in terms of intention, I think that's the word, in his bid to contest in the democratic election?
Well, it's neither here nor there, right? And neither here nor there, like I said, because it's one thing to check the boxes, right? And then it's another thing for people to accept you as the leader, right? Because, and that is where you have the difference between legitimacy and legality. We know, yes, legality, yes, as far as the law is concerned, as far as the written principles are concerned, yes, you check all the boxes. But then the question is, do your government enjoy popular support? Because it goes beyond you as an individual or as a candidate. It translates also to your policies. You are the person that will sanction who would be reprimanded, who would be rewarded. You are the person that will determine where resources go to. Now, the level to which people see this as being righteous or as being the right thing would be determined by the level of their confidence in the first place in you as a candidate.
Now, we've got a clip of the elections that started early in the morning. I don't know if our producers can help us with the visual so that we can actually see, because if you have a situation where some of the opponents are pulling out, that could discourage voters. I mean, just from what you are saying, you could barely see like a lot of people coming out. So that means a lot of people, okay, we could see a few persons at a particular polling unit there. But you look at this and you talk about, you want to talk about the excitement for this election in terms of voter apathy and participation in the process. And you find that from the opinions I sampled from our source, the AFP, regarding some young voters who are excited. They're going to be voting for the first time. Some of them are excited to vote for this family that has, ruled their country for close to 30 years. And some of them just don't want to be a part of that. How do you see these playing out in terms of voter turnout, given the fact that Chad has a history, of electoral malpractice?
Good. And I'm happy you brought this up, because that also brings me back to one of my thoughts earlier where, now, first of all, as for participation, I would permit me to use the Nigerian experience, where we know that there is this for now, because it has not yet been confirmed to be the hypothesis of the fact that illegitimacy or the popularity of a particular candidate spurred citizen interest and participation in the process, where we saw that, for instance, the participation of the youth in the 2023 elections in Nigeria was unprecedented. Now, when you take that premise and then you bring it into this present situation in Chad, then the question is also, does the candidate list spoil that, how would I put it, that sense of followership and participation in the process? Maybe by the end of the day, we'll get to see the actual figures and we'll know the reality of the turnout. But then you can see already that to a large extent, beyond the polling stations of the leading candidates, really there is no massive turnout in others. But then another thing also I would also want to put on the table is also the fact that when you look at Guinea and Mali today, we know, yes, they are under military leadership, but then the question is, what is the genesis of that situation? We know for Mali it was a post-election protest or conflict that led to military striking in to say, look, for the sake of stability, let's come in and do. And then when you look at it, for me, I always tell people it's funny when that was in the case of Guinea, when, for instance, the military were saying, we are here to liberate Guineans from a repressive regime. Now, and how is that? And don't forget that the so-called repressive regime was a president that was massively voted in an election that everybody we know was judged to be okay, but then didn't enjoy that popular support. And for me, that is where the issue is. It's not about holding regular elections. It's about how well do citizens see themselves in the outcome of that election.
Planning for this program, prior to now, I have reached out to several civil society organizations, even citizens of Chad in the United States of America, and all of them gave me, the reply that they don't want to talk about the election. Even people working in the National Democratic Institute that I reached out to in Chad said, oh, we support the election process in Chad, but we are not allowed to speak. So what's your reaction to this atmosphere?
With such responses, to a large extent, it's understandable. It's understandable in the sense that number one is they are trying to protect a fragile relationship, because it's more or less, let's hold on to the little opportunity we have and to see how much of the good can we.
That's the relationship that the civil society organizations have with the government.
Yeah.
Because remember that even this is the first election.
That was what brought me back to the first thing, because it's the fact that at least among the Sahelian states that are under military regime, you have a Dabi that is willing to conduct elections. So, in a way, yes.
But only on the premise that he is going to contest.
And let's not
that is another problem.
Let's not forget the fact that he had promised initially that, number one, I'm not going to contest. Number two, I'm going to be there for only 18 months. These two promises have already been broken. Now, if for an average electorate, the question is this: would you want to vote for a candidate who already has broken two of the promises he made, even becoming a president? But that is a question, or let's say, debate within the realm of voting. But now, beyond that is also, like I mentioned, so you see, when you have people refraining to speak for fear of the consequences, then it's a clear indication that, look, it's more or less like bandaging a wound that is infested. There are so many issues, but just that, can we make good, like I said, of the little opportunity we have? Because, so it can be more or less like them trying to be more diplomatic in their approach, because in all honesty and truth also, it's that time and time again, we have come to see also that there are times that confrontation also may not be the best way out. So, but then on the whole, it speaks to how free the civic space is in that country. It speaks to how free people are to interrogate the process, to give honest feedback, and to criticize. Because see, no matter how good you are, there must be some aspects of yourself or of whatever you are doing that is not known to you, but you would need feedback also. But when that is absent, then it becomes a major problem. And it's also unfortunate that when you look at it also, speaking beyond the civil society and some of the supporting organizations, is also the fact that, like for instance, let's speak to the assassination that happened
of one of the opposition leaders.
For me also, the question would be, why is it that it didn't receive as much condemnation as it is expected? So these are some of the issues that we need to interrogate, and beyond that is also to ask ourselves the sincerity and honesty, right?
But we've got clips of the moment that Dabi and Success Masara voted. We'll play those clips for you, and when we come back, we'll continue with some of our talking points right here on Politics Now.
Sur votre droite. Merci beaucoup.
Plus de gens qui sont prêts à témoigner pour moi. C'est bon? Et pour nous.
All right, glad to know you're still watching Politics Now right here on LN 24/7. And Joseph Umaru, you've been monitoring elections in Africa. We've seen elections recently in Senegal, we've seen in Togo, and now we're seeing what's playing out in Chad. Now, let's talk about the hold on to power, of this Dabi family. We're looking at 30 years plus. You look at a population, I think Chad population is about 18 million. How united are they, to want to break? Do they desire to break, from this hold on to power that this family has? Because now they've given democracy a chance, but is it really a chance for democracy?
And so I think when it comes to that, when you look at the likes of Chad, when you look at the likes of Cameroon, when you look at the likes of Togo, who by chance also happen to be our neighbors, then you get to celebrate the fact that not only have we seen transitions in Nigeria, but for the fact that we have living former presidents.
Yeah.
Right. Now, when you look at Chad and you ask yourself, when you look at geopolitically,
yeah. I don't think my second guest is coming.
Sorry. Geopolitically, when you look at it all around, then the question would now be, are there sources of inspiration or are there models to be copied from? They are neighbors to Cameroon, and you have a Paul Biya who has been in power for so long. You have the likes of Libya that are still trying, and for me, it's key for us to also look at that and interrogate, where Libya, for instance, have been under the claws of the Gaddafi for so long, and then the attempt to dislodge him for power, to a large extent, has, pushed them into a period of prolonged crisis, where they have, permit me to use the analogy of the proverbial Israelites in the wilderness who are saying, "Oh, take us back to our days."
We were not suffering that much when we were under bondage.
Do you get? So you have those examples, and then you have in Nigeria, whom to a large extent, yes, have enjoyed successive regimes of transition and all, but then the question would be, these transitions, what meaningful indicators or indices of growth and development have they translated to inspire that change or that
for all the surrounding countries?
Yes, and then you look at also the likes of Sudan, right? Sudan also to a large extent has also been from one conflict to another. So to a large extent, with the exception of maybe Chadians that are in the diaspora, as far as the Chadian resident in Chad is concerned, there are no meaningful how would I put it, points of aspirations to look up to. And that for me in itself, rather than looking at Chad, is also to look at it geopolitically, either as a region, whether we are looking at the West and Central Africa, or we are looking at it holistically as the African continent. Because democracy in itself is beautiful, but when democracy does not deliver, and then permit me to also digress, when you have the likes of Rwanda, who have been under Kagame for long, doing well, then the question
with lots of positive feedbacks from around the world.
Yes.
So does that make the people want to thirst, for that single
and those
continuous
are
leadership?
the things, because when you look at it, in the whole clamor for independence and multi-party democracy in the 1990s, there were meaningful milestones that were achieved that made others to aspire. There was that sense of solidarity, for instance, for South Africa to end the apartheid regime, right? So do we have that? Because that for me is key. When you look at it, which of the leaders would you even mobilize outside of Chad?
So what you're saying is that we need the likes of the Nelson Mandelas that will come out from the Sahel region.
Definitely, that is key. That is very, very key, because in as much as we say followership is inspired, change in itself is inspired. It may not be bettered within Chad, but we need to, as Africans, start showing that sources of inspiration. It needs to start happening, and this is message beyond Chad. It's message, and that's why when you look at it and we say democracy is under threat, democracy is under threat. Fundamentally, the question is, so far so good since the 1990s till now, what has multi-party politics, what has democracy delivered that Africans can aspire to see? Let it be sustained. That is key.
When we come back, we'll begin to look at some of the key concerns of the people. What's really driving the votes in this election? Just stay with us. All right, glad to know you're still watching Politics Now on LN 24/7. We've been talking about the presidential election in Chad, and we first started by looking at the conflict in that particular country, and also getting to understand the dynamics of leadership over the years with this Derby family. But of course, one thing is very important is the key concerns for the voters. And Joseph, thank you for being with us. You've been sharing with us some of the challenges in this country. It's sadly one of the poorest nations in the world. They've got oil, which they've been relying on for quite a number of years, just like Nigeria. And you have a leader, whose family has been in power for years. There's a mindset, for people who say it's foolishness to be doing the same thing over and over again, and then you're expecting a different result. So how does that play now into this administration, whoever it's going to be, if it's going to be Derby or if it's going to be Success Masra? But from what we're seeing, it's definitely going to probably be Derby. We don't know what the polls are at this time, but hopefully before the week's rounds up, we can actually get a sense of who is going to be the leader of this country. Let's talk about the economy. It's a major concern for voters in this country. Now, from one of the sound bites that we've had access to, one of the voters was talking about, given the fact that Masra comes from an economic background, he worked in the banking sector, he will be able to fix the economy. And then you have someone who he's loyal to, which is his boss, who made him prime minister in the first place. How do you see a change for voters in Chad?
So I think for me, first things first will be the opportunity. Was there even if in the first place the opportunity for the voters to interrogate these candidates? The truth is, the more I participate in African elections, or the more I observe and follow African elections, the more I look back home and I get to celebrate some of the things we take for granted. For instance, things like the presidential debates and the colloquiums and the town halls that happen. Because in a way, you have the opportunity not only for candidates to present this, but there are also robust conversations.
But when you say appreciation, we rarely see that in the African setting.
We rarely see that, yes, and that is why, like I mentioned, we rarely see that. But in a way, I think we can say that is one of the things we need to celebrate and applaud for the 2023 elections in Nigeria, and possibly also to see a way of improving it upon. But then, not to allow that distract us. So for me, is even in the first place, like I mentioned, it's when you go online, you don't see much of the interrogation of the manifesto and the promises of these candidates. So you then question how much information is even available to the voter to make an intelligent choice, because it's not for now. It's for them to a larger extent decide, oh, should I go for an Idris or should I go for a Masra? But then there may be that despondency to say, but after all, how are we even sure that these two represent independent choices or independent pathways? How sure are we is not just them playing to the gallery? And that is why to also see that, because see, the confidence in the process and the confidence of the fact that, look, when I vote, my vote would count matters even in the choice of the voter in the first place. So that let it not be that I'm just going to vote. My vote is an endorsement of an illegality, or true. How would I put it? More or less like give the semblance of illegality to a charade. So before we even talk about choices available to the voters, it's how well is that voter informed? What is the quality of voter education? What is the quality of information out there? What opportunities are there for the voters or citizens to even interrogate the manifestos even of the candidates? Is there even a manifesto in the first place that is well documented and disseminated for people to see and assess? And what analysis are there? Because we know beyond the manifesto is also
and that's very important, because when people have access to the manifesto, then they have something to hold governance responsible. But when those opportunities are not provided, then the status quo continues.
So that is where the issue is. So we need to, like I mentioned, we are waiting to see the outcome of this election. But for me already, these are some of the key lessons to deduce going forward. Chad, Idris Deby, we celebrate you. Or if it is Masra, well done for such. But we need to do better, right? And so whether that is going to be through the diplomatic channels or through the media, as you are doing now, but is the fact that these concerns, for one, needs to be raised. And for me, maybe is also to point out this, and as a key of point of note, I like to point to the Yaradua example of 2007. I know it's one of the most defining moments in Nigeria's electoral history, where you have a sitting president coming to honor to say, look, I know the process
that brought me into power
is flawed, but I am committed to giving you something better. And we saw that in 2011, we saw that in 2015, we saw that maybe I would say 2019 and 2023. But one thing is sure, is that to a large extent, whatever the arguments may be around the legitimacy of principles surrounding organization of elections, one thing is sure, we have departed from where we are in 2007. And so for me, going forward, these are the steps I would love to see. A government owning to say, look, because some of these things at times, it's not about doing everything, but at least what people want to see is the government making sincere and honest efforts to address the issues.
And do you think that Deby or Masara are in the position to do that for the people of Chad?
Well, for now, I would say we are watching, we are observing.
No, but I think we can actually say something, because of they've been in power, I mean, for almost 4 years.
There is already a precedent. I'll be there for 18 months. That didn't happen. I'm not contesting. That didn't happen. Now, that alone are already indicators. But then is also the fact that we know, for instance, allow me to use the Bible analogy. It's the thief to the right of Jesus only had this opportunity at the last moment. So let's give the benefit of the doubt that for in whatever outcome subsequently may emerge, that there is that hope that whoever would be the president would have that consciousness to take responsibility for the process that made him president, and then demonstrate that willingness and commitment also to deliver a better process going forward.
Well, we can only hope for the sake of the people of Chad that they can actually get it right. So whoever wins the election. But one thing is left to be said is the sustainability of this democratic governance, in the sense that the environment in which they find themselves, the location in the midst of these junta-led countries, is one thing that we'll keep our eyes on. Well, thank you so much, Joseph Omoro-Philip, for being with us on the show. Well, unfortunately, our time is up, but of course you can stay right here on LN 24/7 as we monitor updates regarding all things Chad election and politics in general. All right, glad to know you're still watching Politics Now. Away from all things Chad presidential election, we're here to talk about security in West Africa, basically. The U.S.-France bid to move military bases to Nigeria. Our talking points will revolve around why the U.S.-France troops were asked to leave Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Chad, and to the concerns over the U.S. government's interest to host military bases in Nigeria. And of course, we'll talk the pros and cons of U.S.-France defense agreements with West African nations. This is not something that is new. It's been happening, you know, if you go through your history. Now, the military presence of the U.S. on the continent is diminishing, evidenced by its recent withdrawal of troops from Chad. Last month, U.S. troops exited neighboring Niger following orders from the country's junta. In their place, Russian military instructors have arrived in Niger as part of new agreement with the military leaders. The American and French governments have been desperately lobbying the governments of Nigeria, Benin, Togo, and Ghana to agree to sign a new defense pact that would enable them redeploy their soldiers expelled from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Some of the troops have been redeployed to Chad, but France and United States prefer countries of the Gulf of Guinea that are more strategically located to serve their interests in the central zone of the Sahel. But do recall that the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said Washington would evaluate any future steps that would prioritize both their democratic and the security goals of these African nations. And after French President Emmanuel Macron announced the withdrawal of French troops and diplomats from the country. Let's take a listen to what he said.
We really want to see a diplomatic solution evolve. We want to see a peaceful end to the crisis, and most important, we want to see preservation of Niger's diplomatically elected government. And so while we give diplomacy a chance, we'll also continue to evaluate any future steps that would prioritize both our democratic and our security goals. But these goals are intertwined.
Interesting choice of words. So we're not surprised that we're seeing this lobby. Nigeria turns out to be the most strategically located, and there are also indications that the Tinubu administration may be favorably disposed to the proposed defense pact. However, there is a widespread apprehension that the signing of the pact by Nigeria would have a widened range of implications for defense and internal security of the country. Now, some northern leaders have written the president and, of course, the National Assembly on why the federal government should not allow the relocation of the American and French military bases from the Sahel to Nigeria. Now, according to the letter, the northern leaders voiced apprehensions regarding the economic and environmental consequences of hosting the foreign military bases. The implications of hosting foreign military bases, according to the letter, range from the economy, which could potentially divert government funds and resources, resources away from critical areas such as education, healthcare, infrastructure, development towards maintaining and securing these military installations. And they feared increased prices and living costs in local areas that could disproportionately affect lower income earners. And other concerns also ranged from the excavation of existing tensions between Nigeria and neighboring French nations. Do recall on the 22nd of December 2023, the last of France's 1,500 troops deployed in Niamey and 2 other bases in the tri-frontier of Niger were marched out of the country on the 16th of March. And Niger Republic suspended the military agreement with the United States that was signed in 2012, which allowed the U.S. to station about 1,100 U.S. troops and civilian personnel permanently in Niger to operate from 2 American bases in the country, and that is American Air Base 101, which is located in Niamey, where the Air Base 201 is located near the small northern city of Agadez, which is about 920 kilometers southwest of Niamey. Now, these French and American bases were used by the French and Americans to carry out manned and unmanned surveillance flights and other operations in the Sahel. And of course, this has raised a lot of concerns. Well, joining us to make sense of all of these concerns is Dr. Stephen Okwori, security expert. Thank you, Doctor, for being with us on Politics Now. I think I've done all the introduction I need to do and all the background that any sane person will be able to follow up what is going on. What's your reaction to what we are hearing? Nothing is official yet, but just concerns generally based on what the U.S. Defense Secretary, Mr. Lloyd, said that they're finding ways to sort out some of the issues resulting from them being asked to withdraw from these Sahel countries.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I just want to say that what's playing out in Niger and the other African countries like Mali and Burkina Faso, I think is a fallout between their colonial masters. Because, of course, you are aware that France, of course, colonized these countries. And I think that it is politics, international politics, that is playing out there. Niger feels that they've been dominated by France. Of course, the politics of Niger. If Niger wants to borrow any foreign loan or whatever, they must have to go through France. The money is borrowed in dollars. At the end of the day, it's converted into Niger's currency before it's shifted down to Niger for them to see how to begin to spend the money. These things happen. And when they asked French troops to leave, I thought they were going to be completely independent. I didn't know that
Russia was coming in to take their position.
So you see, these things are just interests. They fall out with France, and they feel that they can have another Western ally to see how to work with. But basically, the essence of these troops that we have within the Sahel, the essence is for see how to combat terrorism. Terrorism is a global phenomenon, and a terror attack in a country affects other countries as well. So when you see these troops in other countries, showing their presence, is to see how to combat terrorism. And how far Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, how far they are going. Of course, they are collaborating with other local or domestic terror groups within the African continent to see how to carry out these heinous and barbaric attacks, on the civilian populace, So, yes, just the way you said, no peace pact have been signed, but of course, in international politics, lobby is allowed, and from what we have seen, Nigeria is strategically located within the Gulf region, and they feel that having their military base or bases in Nigeria will go a long way, considering the records that our military have, internationally. So there's a lot that when they synergize, at the end of the day, just the way I said, his interest, whatever the agreements are. But it doesn't take away the fact that even when Balewa and the other Obasanjo, it doesn't matter that if we see that having a military base in Nigeria, the US and the French military base, we have to look at it. Why is it that northern leaders, why is it about the north? You know, if we get the information that, okay, Nigeria are asking, or Nigerian leaders are asking, so why
No, well, even as today, this morning, you know, the northern leaders reacted over the weekend, but even as of today, we've seen more concerns being raised as to whether or not if this will be good for the nation.
Yes, my own candid opinion, I think there are some benefits that comes when we have such military bases in Nigeria, especially the US military base. Of course, it will enhance some sort of security cooperation. You know, there are some of these insecurity issues or challenges that we are facing in this country that has overwhelmed us. You know, there's nothing wrong with having,
most especially in the north.
Yes.
So one would want to ask the question, like, they should be the ones to be clamoring, you know, as in logically speaking, based on the amounts of security challenges in the region.
Exactly.
But they don't want it. But they raise quite some concerns. But when you look into them, you look at economic concerns and all of that. Are you bothered about some of the points they raised?
There are also economic advantages when we decide to have such a military base, you know, because the military base in Niger, over $100 million was spent in building it.
Yeah.
And these resources and the materials they used in building the military base, they didn't bring it from their own land. Some of these were locally sourced, you know. So if they decide to build a military base here, economically, it will boost that community or wherever they are building the military base. Yes, because they will buy materials from the Nigerians that have these materials, and they will serve as contractors as well.
But you saw some of the concerns there is. They said environmental concerns, environmental degradation.
Yes.
How will the military base, you know, bring about environmental degradation in some of the local communities where these bases will be sited?
I think that they are looking at it in the area where maybe when chemical weapons and some other things that they think they should have at their base, you know, the effects of it, you know, might affect people that live within that community.
Which will even lead me to ask you the question, when you talk of a military base, like an American military base, what are the activities that go in there?
Now,
are they going to be mixing chemicals to form weapons for environmentalist proponents to be concerned?
I don't know where they are looking at their own argument from, you know, but I know that this equipment that will be there are already being manufactured, you know, produced and all that.
So not like they're mixing atomic chemicals and all of that.
The whole idea about military base, considering the aim and purpose, you know, and the objective why they set up these bases around is just to survey, for surveillance purpose, for intelligence gathering purpose and all that, because all these terror groups that we have, the whole idea is about surveying, gathering intelligence to see that they are not, you know, being able to meet to be able to carry out these attacks, you know. That's the whole idea, you know. So this equipment, weapons and ammunition, I don't think they will have any drastic effect on people in the event where they eventually find themselves here in Nigeria.
Okay.
But, you know, from my own research and my own opinion, I think that there are some benefits that comes, and the benefits for me are more than the disadvantages that the northern leaders are raising.
Now, there are some people that want to say, okay, a lot of people, you know, have turned insecurity into a business, because I was listening to some comments, I think Governor Rada was making that, you know, people are now beginning to see how lucrative insecurity is.
Yes.
Would you say these are some of the voices that are raising concerns that, you know, if we have probably these military bases in Nigeria, it's like there's no more business for them?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
It makes a whole lot of sense. Do you know why? Because the sponsors of some of these criminal activities that has become so robust and they are making so much money from it, the sponsors, we don't know them. You know, we have sponsors of kidnapping for ransom. Of course, you are aware how much Nigerians have spent in the last 2 years paying ransom, over ₦1 billion. You know, just the Abuja-Kaduna bound train alone, allegedly over '6 billion was raised as ransom by terrorist groups. You know, so when you see all these monies, now, the two masterminds of the Abuja Kaduna train, they were arrested by the police. You see them, very young boys below 30 years. So that huge amount of money, over close to 6 billion.
They don't look like people that have, you know, spent a huge sum of money. So that begs the question, where did the money go to?
Exactly.
Whose pockets?
That's the point.
Are we going to trace that money?
If we have the means.
No, but we've apprehended these culprits. Yes. Are we going to trace the money? Where did those monies went to?
Of course,
the police seems not to be saying anything about that.
Yeah, we have to take it one step after another. Now they have arrested them. Let us see how their investigation goes, because the essence of investigation is to unravel, you know, the true position of how these crimes happen, you know. So let us now begin to look at it in that regard. But the point I'm trying to make is that sponsors of these criminal activities are not known, and it's not written on anybody's head. We see people in the physical, we see that they carry out or do legitimate kind of business, but in the hidden, we don't know what they are doing. You know, so people that are saying that they don't want this military base, you know, in Nigeria, what is their fear? The concerns or the reasons they are even putting forward, for me, they are not germane, you know, because I think that when we have this military base closer to us, the more security cooperation that we can harness from it, we should be looking at the benefits, you know, so that these challenges don't overwhelm us. We have school adoptions here, being, you know, since 2010, we've been having adoptions of children from schools.
And some of those people are still in the bush in Sambisa up till today.
You know, and up to this moment that we speak, you know, we have seen where the Navy SEAL came all the way from the US, you know. A citizen of the US was adopted somewhere in Niger that was brought to Nigeria, you know, and kept somewhere. They came into Nigeria and got the person free, you know. So when we have such alliance, you know, it's for us to begin to look at their agreements. Nigerians should begin to look at the way the agreement will be couched to favor the country more, you know. Of course, the US is coming here. They also have their own interest.
Now, looking at the person of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, he's one to, you know, to do out of the ordinary. Yeah. Like this kind of pressure that is coming from, you know, this northern political coalition now. Do you think President Tinubu is moved, most especially with his investment drive with the United States and some other countries, even like France? I mean, he's been to France for a couple of times now since he became president, and these are relationships. Yes. Do you think he will be open to move to have this base in Nigeria?
I think President Bola Tinubu,
will he bow to pressure? I think that's the right question.
I think that he's out to do the right thing. He has eminently qualified security team. You know, he will have to seek professional advice from them,
and not necessarily political figures who are just making concerns.
This has to do with professionalism. You know, we're talking about security here, and the mistake that we do is that we have allowed the politics to infiltrate security. You know, in the event of trying to do the right thing, we should do the right thing professionally. Let him seek professional advice from his security team. We have the National Security Advisor there, and the other services chiefs and all that, and the police head, you know. And he should extend his consultation to some private security professionals as well, you know, so that he will now see how to go about it, you know. But my own personal view, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Okay. Now, what about relationships with some of these countries in the Sahel? Mm-hmm. We saw what played out when ECOWAS, you know, placed sanctions on Niger. Yes. You know, it was pretty tough for neighboring communities, the border communities, I think, in terms of having food, you know, crossover trade and all of that. A lot of them were impacted. We also the reactions when General Gowon intervened and, you know, President Tinubu had ECOWAS lift the sanctions. Yes. And they were very excited that, okay, that cordial relationship because Niger was not ready to bow. So what would it mean for the relationship that our country has with these francophone countries?
I don't think the sanctions.
If we accept that, are we saying, okay, now we are at war with you?
No, it's not, we're not at war. You know, I think just the way I said, it boils down to interest. You know, now they have exited Niger. Niger has brought in Russia. You know, it's about their interest. It's what they feel. What they feel will be beneficial.
But the Northern Political Coalition is not saying that.
No, the fact is, it won't affect our relationship. Niger, don't forget that they're also committed to the multinational joint task force that we have. You know, they're also making their own commitments there. So the whole thing is about fighting insecurity within the West African sub-region, you know, and there's nothing coming together. If they feel that they can't work together or work any longer with the US and France, and they prefer Russia coming into their country, it's their bidding, is what they feel and is what they want, provided that they are comfortable with that. If Nigeria feels that the US should have their military base in Nigeria, what's wrong with that? It's for them to sit and look at it. How it will even be beneficial to our people.
Now, let's
Because we
say...
have seen where lives of innocent Nigerians are killed, taken away by these criminal elements. If we have a situation where it can be reduced drastically, it's for the interest of the country.
Now, let's quickly examine the history, you know, of these bases in some of these West African nations. How effective has it been so far that would want to make people to agree with your own opinion that, okay, let's give it a try. Let's look at the pros and see if it outweighs the cons before we make that decision. So all these countries that they've had this military base in, how effective would you assess their location in these countries?
Now, I think one of the reasons why the northern leaders raised this objection is because they felt that it was a failure on the part of the military, the US and the French presence in these three other countries in combating terrorism. But it doesn't take away the fact that they did not make any meaningful contribution in trying to see that they combat terrorism in these countries. You know. Now, it depends on the way and manner they operated in that country and how they were allowed to operate, you know. So, but if they failed, in quote now, because for me they did not fail. If they failed, assuming they failed, what is wrong with having them here? To say, okay, let us try. And in trying, what is wrong in trying? We can decide to, just the way I said, couch the agreement in a way and manner it will favor Nigeria. But first of all, in doing that, the president needs to seek concrete and professional advice from people that are saddled with the responsibility of protecting this country.
Okay. Well, we'll be monitoring the president to see his decision on this when they finally get to address the issue. Once again, Dr. Stephen Okorie, thank you so much for joining us on Politics Now.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to have you with us. Thank you, sir. Well, once again, my name is Mono Balagbobo. Thank you for watching.